Okay, let me just adjust my screen real quick. Okay, so hi everybody. I'm glad you could join us. So am I sharing my screen? I am. You see that, right, Adam? Okay,
Yep.
Great. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is the Lawrence Transit and KU route redesign study. As I heard you guys talking with Adam, there's obviously a lot of transit studies going on concurrently in Lawrence right now, which is very exciting. But our focus in this study is the routes themselves, and it's related to the transit hub study in that the two sort of complement one another. But today, what we want to do is kind of talk you through where we are in the study and kind of tell you, next steps and just big picture of how this study is going to work. And then we have some discussion questions that we'd love to get your opinions on, given that you guys are the eyes and ears of the system. So we will start with just a really quick project background, project overview. You guys are probably very well aware of this, but the Lawrence Transit System and University of Kansas have been working closely together for the last several years to create, as seamless an environment as possible for riders. There are a couple of coordinated routes that are jointly funded. The two systems jointly publish a transit rider's guide. And so there's a lot of coordination and cooperation. The two systems together pre-pandemic were carrying about 3 million passengers. Of course, that number came down during the pandemic, but hopefully will return to pre-pandemic levels sooner rather than later. The key point that you guys were just discussing, I think, is that there's this new transit facility being developed at Bob Billings Parkway and Crestline Drive. So that facility will very likely reduce the role of downtown Lawrence as a transfer hub. There still will be transfer activity there, but it won't be quite the primary hub as it is today. And so that new facility necessitates a reevaluation of the transit network to make sure that the transit network going forward works well with this new facility and that the new facility really does complement the system. So given that, the goals of this project are to take a look at the existing service, to analyze it and identify its strengths and weaknesses, and also to identify opportunities to expand service and improve service going forward. So when we're talking about ways to improve service, we're talking about improving the overall efficiency of the system, in terms of ridership and productivity, and then also ensuring that there is a smooth transition to the new transfer facility. The study itself is going to be looking at the fixed route service, but our recommendations may not be focused only on fixed route service. We'll be looking at a variety of approaches to transit service. Some of them are kind of new technologies, new models of moving people around. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes on the next few slides. But just to note that we're taking a pretty innovative, broad approach to solutions here. We're also going to be looking at the potential for a fare-free system. This is something that's been talked a lot about in the Lawrence area for a while, and we're going to be kind of looking at the implications of what happens if we move to a fare-free system for all riders. So the approach of the study that we're taking is to focus on kind of three key data sets to help us understand what's going on in Lawrence as far as transit service goes. We'll be looking at the market for transit. We'll be looking at how service is operating today and what's working and what's not. And then we'll also be listening to stakeholders to hear what their preferences and priorities and perceptions of the system are. So those are three kind of co-equal inputs that we're getting, and you guys are helping us today with this kind of third circle on what do the people say. We want to hear from you, because these first two data sets are kind of technical analyses. They're a number sort of numbers crunching analyses, whereas the third one really gets us kind of to understand the intangibles of what people are seeing in terms of their commutes and ways that we could improve their lives through transit. So we'll talk first about the market for transit. So when we look at the market, we're talking about the underlying environment in which transit service has to operate in Lawrence. And at the top of the things that we're looking at will be density. So density, it refers to the number of people that live or work in close proximity to one another. The more people there are that live and work in close proximity to another, the more likely we are to see transit ridership, and the more likely we are to see fixed route transit service being an effective model. So this map here is color-coded by density. So areas that are yellow, orange, or red have higher jobs plus people per acre than areas that are green or gray. The yellow is anything on here that's yellow is sort of where you begin to where fixed route transit begins to make sense. So that's kind of where we really start paying attention. Anything that is yellow or orange or red is where fixed route transit service has the best chance of doing well, and then the green areas are where there's really kind of a lack of density to really ensure that fixed route transit will do well. Areas that are lower density, they still might have a need for transit, but fixed route may not do as well in those areas because fixed route, like I said, requires density, but there are other models like on-demand type of models that may be something to consider in some of those lower density areas. The other thing we look at is what's called transit need. So transit need is looking not just at population overall, but specific population subgroups. Sorry, guys, I was eating popcorn a minute ago, and I have popcorn in my throat, so 1 second. I apologize. So the transit need is looking at where there are concentrations of zero vehicle households, persons with disabilities, low income households, youth, and older adult populations. So these are population groups that tend to be more likely to use transit than the general public. And so areas that are more orange or red are where you have the higher concentration of population need. So the ideal situation is if transit need and transit potential kind of overlap and coincide. So areas that have the highest transit need, if they also have the highest transit potential, that means that you can invest your fixed route transit resources in those areas, and they can really do the greatest good. They can carry the people with the greatest need for transit in an effective and efficient way through fixed route transit service. But transit need and transit potential don't always overlap. So one example of that would be in a more rural area where you still might see some elevated transit need because you might have aging population. You might have like a mobile home park or something like that where you might have lower income residents, and there might be elevated transit need, but the transit potential might not be there, meaning it's still difficult to serve those folks effectively with fixed route service, and you might want to consider other types of service. Does that make sense to you guys so far? Any questions?
Yeah.
Okay. So then after we get a sense of the market for transit service, we look at what's happening today with the existing services. And that's the service analysis piece. So that's that second circle that I kind of started talking about. Here we're looking at the characteristics and the metrics of the existing service, things like ridership, things like productivity. Productivity is looking at ridership in a different way. It's looking at ridership per hour and per trip so that we can understand how many hours of service or at what cost are you generating the ridership that you are generating? Is it costing you a lot of money to generate the ridership? Is it fairly low cost to generate a lot of ridership? And if it's an area with lower productivity, then we might ask the question, is that investment worth it? If we're pouring in a lot of hours of service into a neighborhood and we're getting fairly low return on investment in the form of ridership, maybe we reallocate those resources somewhere else. So ridership, productivity, on-time performance, those are all metrics we look at. On-time performance is an indicator of reliability of the service. Network connectivity, that's important too. We want to see how well routes connect either geographically or in terms of having their schedules coordinated at key locations where we would expect to see transfer activities. And then finally, we have environmental justice, which is an important consideration. The Lawrence strategic plan is in it. It says that minority and low-income populations should be considered in decision making regarding the investment of resources and so on. So we'll be doing that as we start developing service scenarios. Will ensure that we're not negatively impacting groups like minority or low-income populations. Although we never want to negatively impact any populations, but those are a key consideration. So as I mentioned earlier, when we look at the service analysis, we'll also be looking at opportunities for new service types to consider. So a couple of examples of those. One would be ride-hailing integration. Ride-hailing refers to Uber and Lyft type services. Different transit systems around the country are now integrating those types of services in a few different ways into their own services. Sometimes it's just a matter of cross promotion, where if you open an app for a transit system, you might see Uber and Lyft options on there just for comparative purposes. Sometimes you can actually book an Uber trip through a transit app, and vice versa. In some places, when you open an Uber or Lyft app, you do see transit information as well for comparison purposes. Another type of technology that now is sort of picking up in terms of popularity is microtransit service. So microtransit is very similar to Uber and Lyft in terms of the technology that it uses, but it differs in that it uses a set fleet of vehicles and a set group of drivers, and it's typically much more integrated into a transit system. It's using smaller vehicles in a flexible way, but it's still branded often with the transit brand of the community. And so passengers can request a trip directly through an app, and they're picked up either door to door, or some cases they call it corner to corner. And this is used sometimes as a first and last mile connector. Sometimes it's used during periods of the day when fixed route service isn't operating effectively, like late night hours and so on. Sort of like your late night your night owl service that you guys are currently operating, but using a technology platform rather than a just dial up platform. So we'll be looking at that as well. So the third piece of the puzzle, as I said, is the stakeholder outreach. So there is a survey that's online now. It's been open for a few weeks now. We launched it before KU students left town. We wanted to make sure that they get a chance to participate. So if you go on the Lawrence Transit website, you'll see a link to this. It's the survey is hosted on the Lawrence Listens platform. It's open now, and it'll be open through the first week of July. So we encourage everybody to participate in that survey if you haven't already, and to spread the word about it. So the survey is designed to help us understand who's using transit service and how they're using it in Lawrence. But it also presents a series of trade-off questions that we'll talk about here in just a minute. The reason trade-off questions are important is because transit services have to operate within their budget, within their given budget, and that budget is often fairly limited and tight. And so when you're doing service planning, transit agencies are forced to make difficult decisions on trade-offs. You can I'll give an example here. So one of the trade-off questions is asking if people would prefer longer hours or more frequent service. Obviously, most people would want both, but if you're limited in your resources, which of those would be your priority? And we ask these questions because we want to understand going forward, as we start developing scenarios, we want to understand what people's preferences and priorities really are, because there's usually more than one way to redesign a transit system, to improve a transit system, but we need to have some context of what's important to people. So the example here, the Lawrence transit system operates between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. Mondays through Saturdays, and the frequency of most routes is every 30 or 60 minutes. So we're asking people if they would prefer longer service hours, for example, service until 10, or more frequent bus service. So, for example, service operating every 15 minutes. And I'm going to pause here to see if you guys have any thoughts on that yourselves. But this is an example of a trade-off type of question. And any thoughts on which of these either you personally prefer or you think your riders would prefer?
I assume most would prefer more frequent bus service.
Okay. And is that because you kind of see a point in the day when ridership just really starts declining? And
there are peaks in the day and there are valleys in the day.
Mm-hmm.
8 o'clock, people got to go to work. People want to come home around 5 o'clock,
mm-hmm.
between 3 and 5. So this is generally reflected in our ridership, at least on the transit side.
Okay, great. Okay, anybody else?
Is there any possibility of Sunday service, or is that totally verboten throughout the company?
This is the next question, actually. So thanks. That's a perfect setup. The next trade-off that we're asking people on the survey is if they would prefer adding Sunday service. The issue with Sunday service is that within the current budget, adding Sunday service would very likely require a reduction of service somewhere else, either on weekdays or on Saturdays. That could be a reduction in frequency, or it could be a reduction in hours of service. So the way that we pose the question is adding Sunday service, which could result in a reduction in weekday or Saturday service, or focusing on improving weekday and Saturday service.
That's the most common question that I get is for Sunday service, more so than the frequency.
Absolutely.
People are looking for, because they stop to work on Sundays, mm-hmm. and they have no way to get to work on those days. And they're willing to forego the frequency, I would think, provided we give them an extra day. Mm-hmm. And it solves their transportation problem on that 7th day when we're not working.
Got it. Okay.
I know that a good comment came up in the prior group where someone asked what that service might look like. And, I don't think it'd have to be like a bunch of fixed route service. It could be something like the night line that would operate on Sunday.
Take someone to church.
I think there's levels of what.
Well, and even with the conversation with the passengers, they understand that there would be limited service. They understand that. And they're fine with that. They just need to have something to get from point A to point B, and they'll accommodate your schedule for that.
Do you guys have any sense of time of day needs or anything on Sunday? Are people asking for certain types of trips, or is it kind of the same thing they would do on other days of the week?
Work schedules overlap over the weekdays. You notice it most in Nightline. People who work graveyard shifts, they have to go in on Sunday, so they have to plan their rides around when we terminate on Saturday night at midnight, when we start up at midnight on Monday morning.
And you see that most on the east side of town over there, and right over here at Berry Plastics, which where you see a lot of volume for those rides. Everywhere else would probably be kind of, they needed to go to the grocery store somewhere within the parameters, or to church, like you said, those kind of things. But the workers are the ones that are really kind of, like you said, they got to go to work on Sunday. And when you're out driving the 5 route, early in the morning, they're like, why don't you have Sunday service? Why?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not that so much. It's just you need to give them that. They don't know that until you tell them that, what the scenario is.
Great. Okay. The next trade-off question is whether people would like to see more frequent bus service or faster travel times. So the explanation here is that the bus stops currently in the current system are placed approximately every 2 blocks along each route. The more bus stops there are along a route, the more likely it is there will be a stop close to a rider's final destination. However, if you place stops further apart, a bus can travel along its route faster with fewer stops. So that's the trade-off. Either more bus stops along the route for shorter walk distances, or fewer bus stops for faster travel times.
No.
Say that again?
I think they'll probably want more bus stops, but I don't think people want to walk, especially the older clientele. I don't think they want to walk as far to the destination. I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, think about rainy days or cold weather or hot days. I wouldn't want to do that. I'd rather have more bus stops and be closer to my destination.
Are there any places now that you feel either have not enough or too many bus stops?
There's some inconvenient bus stops that aren't really thinking of how people use transit, in my opinion. But I mean, it's really like a case by case basis, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there are certainly some non-optimal situations to where, you know, if I'm able to, I will stop where they need. And we're kind of allowed to do that if it's not a main thoroughfare. But if it is, then, you know, we certainly have elderly passengers going 3 blocks to get somewhere they're all going, you know. I mean,
Right.
there's lots of situations like that.
Okay.
And there's plenty of bus stops that are built into the route that you wouldn't stop at all day. You just blow past them every day en route.
Yeah, and that, you know, that's fine. I guess that's if they're not, the big issue that we see sometimes is routes that have so many stops that it starts to weigh on their on-time performance, where you have people getting on every single block, and so there, in those cases, could be opportunities to consolidate some stops. I'm not saying you guys have any of those, but that's kind of the thing that we're trying to look out for. Do you feel like that is the case anywhere in your system?
I know the 7 bus stop, like, I mean, it's not really a problem that, it's just like where it's located, the South Park going towards Walmart. I almost passed a person because I didn't see it because it's right by a crosswalk. So I thought they were a crosswalk person that was just didn't hit the light and waited to cross the road. And then I realized, like, no, that's a passenger because it's really badly placed. And it's happened a couple times. I mean, I picked them up each time, thankfully, but I mean, and also it's just the way the cars are parked is just kind of hard to, I don't know, I don't like, it's a bad bus stop in my opinion.
Okay.
And then removing tree limbs so you can actually find them, because when you're a newer bus, it's like really hard to see that. Like you're looking for it, like I'm looking for that blue dot, I'm like, where is it? Like, oh, there's a bus stop. Like that, I know it's not really related, but
no, it's good. Yeah.
Seeing bus stop signs is a lot of help. Like that's ideal.
Right.
I find them, especially if like, hey, it's on to this route. Okay, I can't find this. So you drive like super slow to do it.
Got it. Okay, so then
Just one thing if I can. So there are some housing authority locations that don't even have bus service at all. But I would suggest not only making sure that there is bus service to those areas, but also that each housing authority complex has a bus stop for sure, like right there. Because, you know, for the most part, those are our riders, and for the most part, they're disabled.
Okay.
Like right out here, the number 3, like down Peterson Road, there's a huge complex that doesn't bus service. There's, I mean, the 4 goes to, I don't know the address, on Yale Road, but there's not a bus stop right there. I mean, it you know, like you can stop there, but I mean, certainly there are some drivers who take it really seriously that there's not a bus stop and they'll go past it. And, you know, I don't know what that's about, but I mean, we're allowed to stop.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it should be that certainly in those key locations that should just be built in.
what's the location that you just mentioned?
Oh, okay, so
Probably is a
I would say right out here on North Iowa, there's a bus stop, and in front of the not fast lane, it's the Family Mart right there. There's a bus stop. But if someone wants to get on the bus going downtown. They have to cross a street where there's traffic going 50 miles an hour all day long, super dangerous. And there's, you know, so many of them are coming either from Wrigley Lane or from the housing authority apartments right there. There's fourplexes right in there across from Wrigley Lane. And most everyone, you know, it's very inconvenient and dangerous to cross the street, but they all do it to save time. And I worry about that one in particular. There's also one on Yale Road. And then I was mentioning a housing authority location on Peterson Road where the 3 used to go there, but it no longer does. And I've actually had a lot of passengers, they're eligible for paratransit, but they would rather, you know, have the independence and freedom to ride regular transit. And they've mentioned that to me and I'm like, yeah, you know, sorry. You know, I can't personally do anything about it.
Yep.
But maybe I can. I'm telling you.
Yeah, and that actually sets up our next question really well, because the next trade-off question is asking people if they prefer more service coverage, which kind of describes what I think you were just describing, versus more service frequency. So the way that the buses currently operate, they operate on major streets like Iowa and 6th, but in some cases they also operate on smaller neighborhood streets. So when you do serve those smaller streets, you provide closer access to riders, but keeping buses on the major streets could allow for more frequent service. So the trade-off is, you know, do you want buses coming more frequently but on fewer streets, or buses operating on more streets but with less frequent service on any given street? And that's probably a case-by-case decision, of course, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I would say more stop, like the top picture, right? Of like, so the major ones, just the ones that are close to the neighborhoods, because that would just be easier. Because you got to think of the older people. We do have quite a bit of older people.
Right.
Just for them to walk and everything like that. And so if you help out those, or people with kids, because you don't want them to be like, I don't know, running into traffic or something.
So do you feel that the transit environment in much of Lawrence is a challenge? Is that because if you have, you know, a fairly supportive pedestrian environment, then people can get to those major streets. But if you don't have a great pedestrian environment, then there's more pressure to get closer to people's final destination. Is that the issue that you're seeing, the pedestrian environment?
I don't know. I mean, for about 10 years, I was in a situation of, you know, walking with a stroller and taking the bus. And it is way more possible now than it used to be. It's so much better than it used to be. But Lawrence is really great. I'm sure you know that there are more sidewalks here than average. It really is set up to be able to get around.
Okay. All right. So we'll see what the riders say about this question. The next trade-off is improving existing service or serving new areas. So transit currently serves most corridors and destinations in Lawrence, but there are some gaps. For example, there's little or no service north and west of 6th and Iowa, and west of Wakarusa, where you have kind of newer developing areas. There's still not that much service out there. So should the priority be improving existing service or serving new areas? What do you guys think?
Is there a way to incorporate both of those?
There could be. It's, you know, always, if you expand service somewhere, you have to have the resources to do that. So if in the course of the study we find some examples of unproductive service in some places, you know, we could definitely reallocate resources to serve new areas. Or you could consider, you know, different service types. Fixed route service which is, the 40-foot buses, sometimes has a higher operating cost than some other modes, like the microtransit service that I mentioned earlier. So it's possible that you could eliminate one fixed route, but then replace it with 2 microtransit zones for comparable cost. That's just an example, but there are ways to try to accomplish both one way or another. But do you think there's a greater preference overall in the community to improve on what's already there or to expand to some new areas? Or is it a toss-up?
I haven't heard anyone upset that there is not service on the west side. I mean, unfortunately,
It's the Richie.
Well, not yet, because as development goes, you have the multi-unit component that generally goes in. Well, you have the retail, then multi-unit, then individual living homes. So you're going to see a lot of more multi-units going out there, which means students that can afford to live on the edges will do that. I mean, I see that on the 6th. Once I get past Wakarusa on Overland, there's apartment complexes out there that have, I'm surprised at the volume of students that actually live out there. We only have 1 or 2 stops that, and they've learned to navigate that. So it's pretty inconvenient because it is quite a walk, but as development goes and warrants and expands, those multi-unit places, I mean, if we look at the Nest, for example, that just popped up, they build that fairly quickly. So as you get west of Wakarusa and they put multi-unit living out there, and you have more and more students that can afford to live in that type of scenario and understand that the cost of riding the bus is an ID, why not do it?
Yeah.
Why drive my car when I can take the bus out? And you see that a lot on the 29.
Oh, yeah.
The 29 just gets packed because they've all figured out, why drive? I'll take the bus.
Evenings are nice though.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm seeing it so much on the B schedule in the summertime, but when the school year, I mean, you're going to see probably, I would think the 6th will start to see some changes as you see those units starting to develop and the number of houses go out there too. I'm not sure what Wakarusa, because I don't really drive down that road, so I'm not sure what the development looks like out there. But as Lawrence expands, so does the student population will spread out too exponentially as that happens. They don't want to be in the core. Those that don't need to be in the core or be on campus, they'll move to those multi-unit places like that.
Yeah.
Well, in an area with that kind of development too, that seems to be more geared towards your microtransit model with flex services. I know we used to have a flex service that serviced sort of around the Monterey, past the west end of Monterey and north of 6th Street.
Mm-hmm.
And I if I recall correctly, we didn't have very great ridership through there.
That was the Peterson Road area.
Yeah.
We had some flex in.
It wasn't, I don't think that people spread the good word too much about it. So,
Yeah.
But there's a possibility for that in zones like that. But also the people who live out in that neck of the woods are affluent enough that they don't require public transportation much of the time. It would be a nice option, I'm sure. But the people who really need transit are people who live in low income housing, people who live in the student ghetto, as it's called. And they're going to be in those more densely populated areas inside your previous graphics.
Right. Okay. Yeah, great thoughts. So the last trade-off question I want to talk about is the question about the free fare possibility. Yeah. So transit service is supported by a number of different funding sources, and that includes the onboard fare payment as an important component. A reduction in the funding in any of these funding sources will likely impact the ability of Lawrence Transit to provide and sustain the current levels of service. So this discussion about going fare free has been a discussion for some time now. So there is the possibility of eliminating the current $1 regular fare for all riders. So the trade-off question is, would people prefer to maintain existing fares the dollar per ride for most passengers, or to eliminate those fares, which could result in service reductions on some routes. Do you hear this a lot among passengers? Do you think it's a big issue? Do you feel like there's a strong preference one way or the other?
We have a lot of passengers who can't pay ever, pretty much.
Yeah.
But that's
Like
that's case by case. I mean, certainly they ride, for free. It's fine. But I wonder if there could be sort of like a system-wide fare elimination, but on microtransit and sort of like taxi type services, if that would make up for it. Because I wonder, I mean, if you add up the fare you get in a year from one of these routes, would it even buy the tires? I mean, it's not, it seems like it's not that much money that, I mean, I think more people would ride and it would be more federal money. I mean, it would probably work out that way, that more people would try it if it were free.
Right. Well, we will be modeling those kind of scenarios, because you're right in the sense that fares on pretty much every system around the country make up, around 10%, if you're lucky, covers up to 10% of your operating costs, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. And you're also right that ridership matters, because there's formula funding, as it's called, that comes from the federal government that does take into account the number of riders that you have. So all those things kind of do play together in this discussion. But I'm curious if it's a big topic of discussion that you're hearing on buses.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, people are like, when's it going to happen? Honestly.
And the other thing too, this is selfish kind of bus driver type mentality, but it would be passengers would load and unload a whole lot quicker and easier.
Oh, yeah.
And there'd be a whole lot less discussion. If they just enter the bus, they'd walk and sit down, and we just take them to their
That would be
destination
so much
A and B.
It would be.
And it problem solves a lot of, sometimes there could be some negative interaction, and it would eliminate all of that with the fares not being there. It'd be just an easier process. That's just kind of the selfish part of that as a bus driver, but
it would make it so much easier.
yeah, it'd make it a
And it'd be a lot
we
faster.
already pretty much do it on campus as is. I mean, kids get on and get off, get on, get off.
It's
and if you did that on the city side, it would be the same process.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doubles boarding time. Anytime you require a pass, anytime you require an ID
Yeah.
or a fare or you write out a transfer slip, it
That's-
doubles, if not triples, the boarding time, which adds up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And now with us going into having a newer hub, I think it'd be a lot easier, if the buses are gonna be there for transfers and whatnot, or should be there, having to do the fares and transfers, having to eliminate all of that paperwork would be a whole lot easier for the bus or for the passenger, because the buses are gonna be in a hub in a designated spot, so the passenger then knows where to go to catch their bus.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. Really, really good points. Okay, so for the next section of our discussion, we're going to, Rebecca, who is on this call, and I haven't introduced her, but she's my colleague at Foursquare as well. She's going to be posting your comments on some kind of post-it notes, virtual post-it notes, as we do the discussion. So she's going to share her screen, and I'm going to stop sharing mine. So let's switch that real quick. Rebecca, you're able to, yeah, there we go. All right, so we have a series of questions that are kind of open-ended here. We're going to go through each of them, and we'd just like to get your take on it. So the first one is very broad and wide open. So what are Lawrence Transit and KU on Wheels doing well, in your opinion? How are they serving the community well?
I think that, first of all, Lawrence Transit, what they're doing, like, they're accessible to the passenger. We have a lot of forms of communication for the passenger. We have a lot of ways for them to, I'll let her type.
That's yeah.
I got,
That's good.
I mean, I think, I'll tell you, because I come from two different perspectives, because I live in Topeka and I see a whole different bus transit system. Also, I lived in Washington, D.C. for a long time, so I also saw public transportation in a different view. Seeing what we have here in Lawrence, there are a lot of pluses to the transportation system here in Lawrence. I mean, not everything's going to be 100% efficient, but I think as a whole, it does really well. You're able to get to a lot of places in Lawrence using the current system that we have in place.
Okay, great. Anybody else want to add in anything for what the systems are doing well?
I believe we do compassion well.
Okay.
Helping passengers get to the proper bus, calling each other to make sure we hold for certain transfers if a route's running late. That kind of thing goes a long way to really kind of winning the hearts and minds, I guess, of the ridership.
And that all goes to the training that takes place here. Without that kind of proper training, you wouldn't have that. You can't have that post-it that you just put up. So the training just makes a lot of that available to the passengers. I mean, we go through the process on a daily basis, but I think sometimes we forget to see what we're really doing. And sometimes we get caught up in micromanaging a lot of the incidentals when we're actually doing a pretty good job of getting people around and communicating, like he said, to the passengers.
Yeah, really great points. Okay, we can come back if anybody has anything else that's you think is a positive. We can come back to that. But for now, let's, in the interest of time, move to the next question, which is, how could Lawrence Transit and KU on Wheels serve the community better?
On-time performance and reliability.
Okay.
Especially in terms of vehicles and operators.
What can you explain what you mean by how do you differentiate between vehicles and operators in terms of on-time performance?
Well, see, we've got the schedule set in place, and we've essentially published a list of promises that we're going to make in terms of our time points. Mm-hmm. And whenever a bus goes down, where's the operator? We just need more operators. This last semester has been a hair pulling contest between dispatchers, supervisors, extra boards, and the managers. We just need the manpower. I know that this isn't a problem that is, specific to our place, but
it's a trickle down effect, though.
It trickles down. Whenever one person that doesn't show up to work, nearly two people got to scramble to cover that issue. And then whenever the buses are out there, depending on weather, depending on traffic conditions, depending on, we do good training, but there's so many chaotic elements that are out of our hands that we'll put a bus route down to the point where, and some routes in particular more so, we'll put those routes down to the point where usually the most vulnerable passengers will have to deal with the biggest brunt of that frustration.
Which routes are you talking about?
Like Route 7 in particular.
That one doesn't have a whole lot of time built into
it. And of course, this is all going to follow through with the route redesigns that are going to happen with the hub. But this is it. In order, how could we serve the community better? Getting back to your primary question, we could probably put some money into the basic resources, because it takes the human element and it takes reliable vehicles.
Like the 7, it doesn't even have, like, it barely has any time, and the driver doesn't even have time to use the bathroom. Like, I don't drink on that route. On that, when I drive the 7, I don't drink. I
Okay.
don't. I just like I'm not gonna have time to go to the bathroom if I get down. And then also on the Route 7, it's not it's at the T junction of Lawrence and 31st. Please, can you guys put like a traffic light there? So like it's triggered by cars only kind of traffic light, because it is so, I don't feel comfortable. I mean, I do it, but I don't like it because it makes, I have to cross 4 lanes of traffic in a 30-foot bus. And I mean, I sit there and it just, and like, I know even like I've heard other people who live in that area don't even want to, like, it's hard for them like to get out. It's just super dangerous. I mean, even if it's a triggered light, that would be ideal. But if you guys have a light, that'd be so helpful for us, because we'll have to make a left-hand turn crossing 4 lanes of traffic.
Yeah, 45 miles an hour
Exactly.
is the traffic.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
people go 50. I mean, people these 50, 55.
That's definitely the kind of issues we'll be looking into. I don't know if there are any alternative routing ideas in that area, short of installing a signal. But that when we do see those situations, we do try to find a nearby intersection that is signalized. I'm not sure if there's one in close proximity or not.
Even the residents can get out, because even the residents have a hard time. Just anybody have that whole residence area getting out. I mean, that would just help everybody. Not even the bus drivers. It would just help everyone as a whole.
Right, and we'll be documenting those issues that can potentially be resolved, not just by Lawrence Transit, but by the city or the county, or I'm not sure who controls that particular intersection, but we'll take a look at that. Okay. The next question is, do passengers have the tools that they need to understand and use Lawrence Transit and KU on wheels? So these are the kinds of navigation tools we're talking about, are trip planning tools, real-time transit data, stop level information, maps, schedules, all those things. Do you feel like passengers have the tools that they need to use the service?
You have 2 different types of riders, so you have to keep that in mind. You have the city riders and then the KU students who are fairly proficient with anything that's going to be on an app. And then you have the city riders, and a vast majority of them, sometimes they don't even have a telephone to look up that kind of information. They're reliant on the bus driver to relay that information to them when they see a bus driver. If it's not necessarily when they're on the bus, I'm downtown enough that they're there in between when the buses show up, and they're wondering what time and where the bus goes to, that kind of stuff. And it's all verbal communication with them. So a physical map might be a helpful, a large physical map actually
For them to see. Yeah.
For them to see, and also come to find out as late, because I do speak Spanish, so I'm fortunate in that aspect. But having another language on there to help them with that a little bit too.
Okay. Is that a common issue, language barriers?
You're in A schedule. I don't know what he's going to do, and I'm not sure with COVID how they're managing people coming into the country. But we do have, you're going to have a large Asian population, Middle Eastern population, Latin American. So you're going to be across the board trying to communicate with those folks. I mean, we did do that language thing 6 months ago, where we sat down and they have a form fill out how to best navigate, when you have those frustrations. But multi-language on campus, but not so much on the city side. Probably English and Spanish would probably be the 2 primary languages.
Okay.
And you don't see a lot of Spanish, but you do see it from time to time.
Okay, great.
I would suggest that any maps have more landmarks on them, because the most frequent thing I run into is I'm holding up the map and saying, this is what you do. And they can't read the map. They can't.
It's too simple.
They cannot
It's almost too.
Because most people
Yeah.
don't know the
It
cross
takes me a little
streets,
bit too.
but they do
sometimes.
know the landmarks. So if I say I'm going to Dollar Tree, they understand that. But in my head,
Yeah.
it's 27th and Iowa. So that's what, as a bus driver, I know the cross streets. They want to understand. A lot of the folks, they just don't, they know where they live and they know where they're going, and that's it.
Maybe don't put the Dollar Tree on the map, but any social service agency or nonprofit or something. I mean, places that a certain population might know.
But Dollar Tree would also be a good reference.
No,
so.
it was
Well, I
fun.
mean,
No,
it's like-
yeah.
It would
It's
be good to like,
close.
oh, I know.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean,
Or actually, you could use local landmarks from local businesses. That might not be a bad idea.
More parks or something.
Yeah. From the last group of operators we talked to, they had some ideas of putting maybe at the new transit hub a list of key destinations and like a reference table, Walmart, other Walmart, like, have the, just simplify it to, if you're going to this place, take this route and
Yeah.
have a sign like that. So,
that would make
Alright.
Walmart.
One thing I might just add into that is we did change up how our maps are gonna look in the riding guide this upcoming year, because I also think that they're two kind of routes that float in the middle of nothing. So they've got more background information. So there's, you see like parks and water bodies and things like that that can orient you to where you are in the city. There are like points of interest on there, and I guess we'd be interested in your guys' experience if additional ones could be helpful on different routes. That would help us make that better year after year.
well, think about that. This isn't the last chance we'll have to provide input. The next question is if Lawrence Transit and KU on Wheels provide an inviting passenger environment. And there's a lot of aspects to that. So it could be the stop level, it could be onboard the buses, it could be the interaction with drivers. All of those things contribute to an inviting environment. But overall, do you feel like it's an inviting passenger environment?
Currently, I don't think it is, and it's probably primarily due to all passengers and all drivers needing to wear masks. So that creates a barrier to communication, as well as the COVID barrier that we have hanging up over our driver's area. That creates another separation between us and the passengers.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're operating your bus, the noise of the air conditioning, the noise of the engine, if anybody has any questions, it's very hard to communicate and create an inviting environment.
I just use a speaker. Oh, that's easier. I found out if you just use a speaker, the mic, like, okay, then
Oh, that's what we're supposed to do.
Oh, I just do it because I'm like, I'm not gonna try. I'm not gonna that's required. This is just easy. Up here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Really good thoughts. Hopefully the first part about the masks will take care of itself. But yeah, well, those are good thoughts. Okay.
Tell us, are we taking masks off on the buses whenever the FAA takes masks off? Is all federal under the same umbrella?
Got a TSA directive through September 13th currently is the date that they've set. So
And then
we keep our eye on that. And hopefully it doesn't get extended, but that's where it's at right now.
But it's not the same as all federal transportation.
That is the federal, that's the federal guidance for any form of, lots of forms of mass transportation, but including public bus transportation. So kind of where we're at.
I like the
It'll be
face mask, but that's just me. I'm a weird person.
That's really weird. No, I have felt sleepy, over sleepy because of the mask, and it scares me a little, and I have to kind of, breathe. But
Put on.
the paper.
Okay. All right, guys, we have just a couple more. Thanks for sticking this out. But the next question is, so we've heard a lot of ideas thrown out today about ways to improve service potentially. If we had to prioritize kind of a top change that Lawrence Transit or KU on Wheels could implement to encourage transit use, what do you guys think that is? And before, one other thought on that is, we're talking not only about people that maybe ride today and maybe could ride more if we did this, but also new passengers. Like what's keeping, folks from riding, even trying the bus in the first place.
Number one would be making the fare free.
Yes.
It would,
So
It would
many
change
problems, and it would save us so much time.
I think we'd get a ton of good PR just from that, and all the newspaper articles, local news shows. I mean,
The majority of people who get on a bus don't want to talk to anyone. They want to get on the bus and go to their destination, and they don't want any hassle over it. And they especially don't want to be questioned to their right to being on the bus because of their finances. The free fare would open up so many doors for so many riders.
And then
I'm
people don't
sure.
have to think, do I have that dollar today? Like, oh crap, I forgot my dollar at home. Like, because said the thing about having cash on it. It's just, it would solve so many problems, honestly. Just so many. I mean, honestly, if no one shows me their badge or ID or whatever, or doesn't put money in it, I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna ask. I don't want to. There's no point. If I don't see it, whatever.
Okay.
I think I would like to, one more, a close second would be late night service and Sunday service. It's something we hear from passengers a lot. And I try to explain that the actual need for those services is pretty low, and it might help, a few people, but it's going to be difficult to do that. But it is something, speaking for them, what they often ask for.
We say late night for people interested in like fixed route going later as opposed to
Going to 10, 11, that kind of thing. And I try to explain that this is a small town, this isn't New York. So,
So what's the?
We would get more ridership.
I'm just curious to follow up on that, on the late night question. Do people not consider the existing late night service to be a suitable alternative, or?
Well, it's $2 to ride, and you have to make your reservation 5 days out. Set up a profile. It's
That's
like a
not a
limited
hassle.
version of paratransit.
Okay, too cumbersome.
It might be a little too cumbersome for some people,
Yeah.
but we do accommodate about 60 people a night, at tops.
And if you could encourage more people, it goes back to the earlier posted, is where do we get the people to drive that service? I mean, we struggle with the volume of drivers that we have at the moment. Nightline's kind of a tougher niche to fill. I mean, where do we get those folks from? And I worked at dispatch too. A lot of them didn't understand. You have to explain to them how Nightline works. That's part of the problem with Nightline, is trying to explain to them so they understand that it's not a normal bus that comes and stops at the corner. We actually go to your house and pick you up, or go to the store anyway.
Okay, those are really great observations. So the last question is, are there places where you guys have been that you really thought, okay, this place really gets transit right and we could learn something from them? Any things that you've seen anywhere else that you think would be applicable in Lawrence?
I mean, Washington DC is really great, but it's a big city. One thing I like that Kansas City is doing is they have that really great little trolley. I don't know. I mean, like the rail that just goes from Union Station out to City Market, just back and forth all day. And what's amazing is that you would think that it would be people who just wanted a free fare who would ride it, but you see everyone.
Well, they also have the
Everyone
max
is on it.
too, which is that it goes from River Market all the way south, but stays only on Main Street, and then turns around and comes back, so you could use it as a connector for all the other routes too.
It would
Okay.
be neat to just try something that goes down a thoroughfare just for free and
Mhm.
just see how it works in Lawrence, or if it does, or, I don't know. I don't know if Lawrence has big destinations like that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Really.
No, we don't. We have nothing. I mean, we have
Well,
nothing.
there are, yeah. I mean, there are many systems that have sort of a circulator of various types. Sometimes it's rail, sometimes it's bus, but it's a model that's been applied in a lot of different places. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. And I think you got it exactly right. It kind of depends on the weight of the destinations. Like, is it something that people there's a critical mass of people all the time that want to go to those destinations or not? Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on places to get transit right?
We don't get out much.
Like, we don't. Like, I mean, if we had bathroom accessibility, that would be nice too. But
If you had what?
more bathroom accessibility,
Oh.
but for bus drivers.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I mean, that's honestly, because it's like, that's why I don't drink on routes. Like, okay, the 5, this is weird, and I don't understand this, but at the 5, it's, what is it called? Holding station area? I can't think of it. Our time
Flyover.
point. Yeah, we say we are at Amar for like a good bit, and I can't pee out there. I mean, sorry, I can't use the bathroom or anything because there's no place to go. But there's no like holdover time for anything else. I guess I could go to McDonald's, but if I want to maintain my time, just like it made more sense if you had a hold, like you'd be held at a different spot, and then where a bus driver could. Because I mean, a lot of these, I understand the transit is for the people, and it makes sense. But like, if you looked at where bathrooms accessible is for drivers, that would be huge, because we don't get out very much, or we don't have a whole lot of downtime, depending on where it is, because we don't have time to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, I'm guessing the new transit center will help with that quite a bit, at least for the routes that are routed through there. So there's some hope on that front, I believe.
I just had someone had to say it. I don't know.
I mean, that's an important issue, that buses don't drive themselves. So yeah. All right. Any other thoughts?
What I like about New York is that, anywhere you are, you can see a taxi. And there are certain places where there's a line of taxis, and you know that they're always going to be there. One thing that would be cool, I think, would be if the service that currently is for KU students only could be expanded, so that there's like a safe ride type service for everyone.
Ooh, yes.
What if we could park at all times from like 8 o'clock at night till 3 o'clock in the morning, have people parked at like 9th Street where the taxis used to be. And someone wants a ride, they pay $4, go anywhere in Lawrence. That, that would, to me, that would be used by everyone, I think. And that would be one way to get people to realize that transit is for everyone.
And
Maybe.
I guess to go with that, can I ask, can we get information about the microbus system so we have a little bit more better, feel more informed, and the other service and how they work I can always go home and look it up, but how they work best in other cities? Maybe, I don't know, are there a lot of cities of comparable size that use those currently?
Yeah. You know what? Let me just quickly, I'm going to switch screens with Rebecca and show you that slide again. I'm not sure if you, hold on a second. Let me bring that back up.
I might just mention, honestly, Nightline is close to microtransit. It's smaller buses that we operate. It's if that service had on-demand app associated with it where people can.
Okay, Boris, I just stopped. So I'm going to sign off.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay,
Okay.
I got it.
Okay, cool.
Just let me get this up.
That technology piece, that service could very quickly become.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca.
Then the other part that I have to understand about that, the functionality of it. So if they go in and say, hey, I need a bus or I need a ride, and I hit it, and it says that I'm going to pick you up at 10 o'clock, but nobody's there because we don't have the resource. Does it
Yeah.
does the local system understand, like, we can't,
So
there's no way
if
to do that, right?
yeah, this is something we will be talking a lot more about in future meetings. So I'll give like a really kind of brief overview, but you can't half do microtransit. Like if you're going to do microtransit, it has to be like done right. So in other words, it's an app-based application. It's an app-based demand response service. So you define the way it's done is you define the hours and you define the territory. Typically, it's done in a zonal structure. Some communities do it, system-wide, but more often it's done in a zone structure. So if you identify a particular zone, maybe on Friday night, Saturday night, that has a high demand for like safe ride type of service or anything or something like that, then you allow for trips to be taken within that zone, and it's dispatched by the users themselves. They can see in real time where their vehicle is when it'll get to them, and it can be done using your own vehicle. So in some transit systems have used their vehicles and they basically equip them with a tablet or an iPad that then allows it to be dispatchable directly by the users, or it can be done as a contracted service where you have smaller vehicles like minivans or other kind of vans. But that's how it works. And typically you have more than one vehicle in operation in a zone, because then you can really take the maximum use of the planning software function. In other words, if you have two vehicles operating, it'll dispatch the most logical one to the trip that is closest, that makes the most sense, rather than if you have just a single vehicle, then that vehicle may be going end to end of the zone every single time. It's not as efficient, but it's a application that's very similar to Uber and Lyft, as I said earlier, but it uses these specialized transit vehicles. So whereas Uber and Lyft is doing, pickup, drop off. It takes one person to their destination, then gets the next one. These are shared use vehicles. So you could have 3 pickups in a row, and then, 2 drop offs, another pickup, 2 drop offs. It's much more of a, mass transit type of feel than Uber and Lyft, but it is flexible and it is directly dispatchable by the users. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. So so that's, I think, pretty much what I wanted to cover today. So I really do appreciate all the input that you guys have provided. We'll be reconvening these we'll be inviting you guys to come to the next round of meetings in a couple of months when we have actual service scenarios to vet with you. And for now, we have a few more meetings this week where the public can come and hear this presentation and provide their input. And as I said, we also have that survey that's still up and running. And so we do encourage you to take it yourselves if you haven't, tell your riders about it, tell your friends about it. The more people that we have participating in the survey, the more representative the responses are. So any questions before we sign off?
When's your meeting for the city people? The next one you had this week, you said?
Yeah, so we have
Or
so this is kind of like the list. So we have a general public meeting on tomorrow night from 6 to 8. So folks can tune in, can get on. It's a Zoom meeting, so they can anybody's invited to join. And then we have some other activities during the week. Adam, I don't know if you've told everybody about the workshops you guys are hosting.
What we're doing on Thursday, we'll be at the library throughout the day, having draw your own route workshops, we're calling them.
Oh, God.
Where people can,
That sounds fun.
on a paper version, or we also have a web-based platform used for our planning purposes that we can kind of alter existing routes or draw something new from scratch. It's kind of, as Boris mentioned, there's a lot of technical ways we'll look at route structures, but we also are looking for these more qualitative, like if somebody just has their idea, try to capture that early on. Mm-hmm. And then you see a couple other kind of focus group meetings where we're trying to catch major employers or community type organizations, but public's also welcome to jump on those. if they want.
Okay. 'Cause I know my mom was kind of interested, definitely just look at it, but I just didn't know. For the Zoom meeting, do you have to have like a code or anything
So
for that?
yeah, there's if you go on the Lawrence Transit website, there's information about every one of the meetings, and it has a link, so anybody can go on there and join the Zoom meeting. It's not.
I can get you the part of the website that has it's their project page. Have all the links. You also type in your name and your email address, and then it'll let you into the meeting.
Oh, okay. My mom's done Zoom. I have it, so I like it. That's why I was like, this is our code. I know you're laughing at me, don't you?
When you guys do that hub downtown, I just wondered, and I've seen this before, where the routes are listed, estimated arrival time.
Yes.
So instead of them going, where's the bus, the 7th should be here in 3.5 minutes.
That would be awesome.
That's part of what we built into that cost is real time.
Oh,
signage,
yeah,
both
nice.
downtown and the new hub out at Poplar Links.
And would you put it in any other locations in town? Because like Walmart's has a lot of buses that go there.
Oh, yeah.
Every time you pull up, where's the 5, where's the 7,
Where's the
11?
9?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know. I think at
South
the bottom
Iowa,
of the hour.
Sixth and Walk would be the next logical place to put it. I mean, having that information also, not
A big
only in a
one.
double map app, but on other.
because
phone
it
apps.
turns, what it do is help the temperature of the passenger a little bit to kind
Set
of,
some expectations.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Which then translates to the bus driver.
And then I'd get a lot less customer service calls.
Yeah, we like that.
I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, because going to free and communicate and finding a way to better communicate to the passengers solves a lot of problems.
That and you don't have to call.
The
get on
free is
radio,
huge.
too.
I mean, it would just make bus travel a lot more efficient for the driver and the passenger.
That and you wouldn't have to call the other driver. Like, hey, is this person here yet? I don't know. 'Cause
I bet we would have more driver retention too.
Mhm.
So it's gonna be so much.
Because some drivers interact with passengers really well, some don't. I mean, that's just,
Quite the
that's
opposite.
just, yeah.
I'm just like. leaving
Well,
it
that's
on.
just how,
You drive.
that's just how everybody is, but it would make the bus, I think, a little bit more efficient.
Well, that-
And it would calm the radio traffic. We don't need to call the transfers out anymore. So the only time that we're calling on there is if a supervisor or, whatever else happens, bus breaks down or those kind of issues. But as far as passenger issues,
Or if the 7's down. Because everyone leaves.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. Thanks again for your time and all your comments. And we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of months. And